Imagine spending your hard-earned savings on a brand new RV, something you've dreamed about for years. The excitement of owning it is fresh. You picture road trips, family adventures, and the freedom of the open road. But then, before you even get to enjoy a single proper journey, someone decides to take that joy away from you. Not just anyone, your own homeowners association's so-called Karen, the one who has been watching your every move, judging every decision, and enforcing rules that seem more like personal grudges than community standards. This isn't just a story about rules gone too far. It's about a nightmare where my RV didn't just get vandalized, it burned. And the shocking part? The very person I suspected most, the same Karen from the HOA, not only acted like she owned the neighborhood, but went even further. After the fire, she boldly walked straight into my home, bringing her assistant along, without permission, without knocking, as if my front door was her property too. What happened next left me stunned. This wasn't just about a burned RV anymore. This was about crossing every boundary of privacy, respect, and basic human decency.
Setting the scene. Before everything spiraled out of control, life in my neighborhood seemed ordinary. I had recently moved into what I thought would be my dream community. The houses were neat, the streets were quiet, and on the surface, everything looked perfect. People waved when you passed by, lawns were freshly cut, and the HOA promised order and peace. For a while, I believed I had found the right place to settle down. My RV had just been delivered a few weeks earlier. It wasn't just another purchase. It was my pride and joy. I parked it neatly on my driveway, making sure it didn't block the street or inconvenience anyone. Every morning, I would step outside with a cup of coffee and admire it, already imagining the road trips I'd take. To me, it was a symbol of freedom and something I worked years to afford. But even in those early days, I noticed eyes on me. Not friendly, curious eyes, but sharp, judgmental ones. Karen, my HOA neighbor, had a reputation. People whispered about her constant complaints and her need to control everything in sight. If a flower bed wasn't trimmed perfectly, Karen had something to say. If a car was parked slightly out of place, Karen was already writing a notice. I had hoped she would ignore me. After all, I wasn't breaking any rules, or so I thought. The RV, however, quickly became the center of her attention. I could feel her watching from her window, arms crossed, lips tight, as if my simple joy was somehow an offense to her. Still, I tried to keep peace. I waved, smiled, even nodded politely whenever I saw her. But all I got in return was a cold glare. It was clear that in her eyes, my RV didn't belong, and by extension, maybe I didn't belong either. Looking back, those little warning signs, the stares, the murmurs, the passive-aggressive comments, were the beginning of something I never imagined. At that point, I couldn't have guessed that Karen's irritation would escalate into something destructive, something that would not only rob me of my RV, but also shatter the sense of safety in my own home.
First red flag from HOA Karen. The very first red flag came sooner than I expected. I had only enjoyed my RV for a few days when I found an envelope taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was some kind of welcome note from the HOA, maybe a newsletter or a friendly reminder about community rules. But as soon as I opened it, my excitement turned into confusion and then frustration. The letter was from the HOA, signed by none other than Karen herself, who sat proudly on the board. It stated that large vehicles, such as RVs, are not permitted to be parked in driveways, and that I had 48 hours to remove the violation. The wording was harsh, cold, and deliberately intimidating. Now here's the thing. I had already read the HOA handbook cover to cover before purchasing the RV. I knew exactly what the rules said, and the rules clearly allowed RV parking as long as it didn't block sidewalks or create safety hazards. I wasn't breaking a single guideline. Still, Karen treated my RV as if it were some kind of crime against the neighborhood. I decided to stay calm.
Instead of reacting with anger, I wrote back a polite email quoting the exact section of the HOA rules that permitted RVs. I even attached photos showing that my RV was parked neatly, well within property lines. I thought that would settle the matter. But with Karen, things are never that simple. The next morning, I caught her standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, circling my RV like a vulture. She was snapping pictures from every angle, as if she was building a legal case against me. When she noticed me watching, she didn't smile, didn't wave, she just gave me a sharp look and muttered something under her breath before storming off. A few days later, another notice arrived, this time threatening fines if I continued to ignore community standards. At that moment, it became clear. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. Karen wasn't trying to uphold community values. She was trying to bend the rules to fit her personal agenda. Neighbors quietly warned me too. One of them, a friendly older man, leaned over the fence one evening and whispered, "You'll never win against her. She's gone after everyone at some point." That's when I realized Karen had a history of targeting people, and now she was her latest obsession. The first red flag wasn't just a simple letter. It was the beginning of a battle. It showed me that Karen didn't care about fairness or truth. She wanted dominance, and she was willing to twist rules, intimidate neighbors, and use her HOA position to get it. At that point, I still hoped things would calm down, but deep inside, I knew this was only the start of something much darker.
Karen's obsession with HOA rules. If the first letter was just a warning sign, what followed next revealed the full extent of Karen's obsession. For her, HOA rules weren't just guidelines, they were weapons. She carried them like ammunition, ready to fire at anyone who didn't fit her vision of the perfect neighborhood. After my polite response about the RV, I thought maybe she would back off. Instead, it seemed to fuel her even more. Suddenly, I was receiving letters almost every other week. One claimed my grass was a half-inch too long. Another complained that the color of my front door mat didn't match the community aesthetic. She even accused me of leaving my trash bins visible for more than 5 minutes after pickup day, something every neighbor did without issue. It was clear she wasn't enforcing rules equally. She was targeting me. My RV had become a symbol of defiance in her eyes, and she was determined to make my life miserable until I gave in. Karen didn't stop at letters. She started patrolling the street like a watchdog. Early mornings, late evenings, I would catch her strolling by with a clipboard in hand, scribbling notes and muttering to herself. One day, I saw her actually measuring the distance between my RV and the sidewalk with a tape measure, as if she were a city inspector. It would have been funny if it wasn't so disturbing. Neighbors began to notice too. Some whispered that she had always been like this, going after people for small infractions, exaggerating problems, and treating her role on the HOA like a personal throne. Others avoided her completely, choosing to stay quiet rather than risk becoming her next target. The obsession got so bad that I started to feel watched in my own home. Every time I stepped outside, I could see Karen peering from behind her blinds or standing on the curb with her assistant, pointing toward my property. She wasn't just following rules, she was hunting for violations, real or imagined. At one point, she even called a special HOA meeting to discuss the RV situation. Imagine that, a full meeting with board members gathered, all because one neighbor couldn't stand the sight of my vehicle. Thankfully, a few level-headed members pointed out that I wasn't breaking any actual rules. But Karen didn't take defeat well. She stormed out, red-faced, vowing to restore order. That's when I realized this wasn't about an RV or trash bins or grass length. This was about control. Karen's entire identity revolved around her power in the HOA. She thrived on intimidation, on bending people to her will, and she wasn't about to let me challenge her authority. Her obsession with rules was more than annoying. It was dangerous. And as I would soon find out,
It was only a matter of time before her need for control pushed her to do something far more extreme.
The day of the incident, RV on fire. It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything feels normal, at least for a moment. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and I was inside finishing dinner when I caught the faint smell of smoke. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor was having a barbecue. But within minutes, the smell grew stronger, thicker, until it was impossible to ignore. I stepped outside and froze. My brand new RV, the vehicle I had worked so hard for, the dream I had been so proud of, was engulfed in flames. Bright orange fire licked across its sides, smoke billowed into the sky, and the heat was so intense I had to shield my face just standing at a distance. Panic rushed over me. I grabbed the hose, but the flames were already too powerful. I dialed 911, shouting for help, while neighbors rushed out of their homes, some recording on their phones, others simply watching in shock. A few even tried to comfort me as the fire department arrived. The firefighters worked quickly, but by the time the flames were put out, it was too late. My RV, barely weeks old, was nothing more than a charred, melted shell. The sight broke me. Something that symbolized freedom and joy had been reduced to ashes in less than an hour. But as devastating as the fire was, another feeling crept in: suspicion. Fires don't just start out of nowhere, and this wasn't an accident. The RV had been sitting untouched all day, and there was no electrical problem with it. Deep inside, I knew this was intentional. Someone had done this. And who did I see standing at the edge of the crowd? Arms folded, eyes cold, watching without saying a single word. Karen. She wasn't offering sympathy. She wasn't shocked like the others. She stood there like she had been waiting for this moment. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch. She just stared back, then turned away. That look was enough to confirm every suspicion I had. The fire marshal later said the cause was likely arson, though they couldn't immediately prove who did it. But I didn't need a signed confession. All the harassment, the constant letters, the threats, everything pointed in one direction. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the blackened remains of my RV. The loss was painful, but the realization was worse. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was war. Karen had crossed the line so severe that it wasn't about rules or community standards anymore. It was about destroying me personally. I had no idea. The fire was only the beginning. The real invasion of my life was yet to come.
Suspicion on Karen. After the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just bad luck, it was deliberate. The firefighters and the fire marshal both hinted at the same thing: the way the flames had spread, the smell of accelerant, and the speed of the burn suggested arson. They didn't come right out and accuse anyone, but the message was clear. Someone had set my RV on fire. The question was, who? On paper, anyone could have done it. Maybe a random vandal, maybe some teenager playing a cruel prank. But in reality, there was only one person who had both the motive and the history of harassment: Karen. The very next day, I checked my security cameras. Unfortunately, the angle of the cameras didn't fully cover the driveway where the RV was parked. Still, one clip caught something interesting. Around midnight, just hours before the fire broke out, a shadowy figure could be seen walking slowly past my property. The footage wasn't clear enough to show a face, but the build, the posture, and even the way the person carried themselves, it all screamed Karen. Neighbors quietly began talking, too. One of them told me they had seen Karen outside unusually late that night, pacing near the corner of the street. Another neighbor admitted they overheard her ranting days before about how that RV is ruining the neighborhood. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. What really sealed my suspicion, though, was her behavior after the fire. While most neighbors came by to offer condolences or at least express shock, Karen's reaction was cold. She didn't say a word to me. No sympathy, no concern, not even a fake "I'm sorry for your loss." Instead, she stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching as if she was inspecting her handiwork. The look on her face wasn't sadness, it was satisfaction. I reported my suspicions to the authorities, but without solid evidence, their hands were tied. "We can't accuse someone without proof," the investigator told me. Proof. That was the missing piece. I knew Karen had done it, but knowing and proving are two very different things. Inside, I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. Anger because I knew my dream had been destroyed by someone who had been targeting me from day one. Helplessness because the system wasn't moving fast enough to hold her accountable. But deep down, I also felt determination. If Karen thought she could scare me into submission by destroying my RV, she was wrong. This wasn't over. At that point, I thought the worst was behind me. The RV was gone, the damage was done. And surely Karen would stop now that she'd made her point, but I was mistaken. Burning my RV wasn't enough for her. She was about to cross an even bigger line, one that would invade not just my property, but my home itself.
If the RV fire was shocking, what happened days later was even more unbelievable. Losing my RV, it left me shaken, but at least I still had my home, a place I thought was safe, a space no one could violate. But Karen was about to prove me wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was inside catching up on paperwork when I heard my front door creak open. At first, I thought maybe I had forgotten to lock it and a delivery person had stepped in by mistake. But when I walked into the living room, I froze. Standing there, bold as ever, was Karen. And right behind her was her assistant, a younger woman I'd seen trailing her during her HOA inspections. Neither of them knocked. Neither of them asked permission. They just walked in as if they owned the place. I was stunned. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded. Karen, without an ounce of shame, replied, "We need to discuss violations directly. Since you haven't been cooperative, I decided it was best to handle this in person." Violations? She had already burned down my RV, at least that's what I believed, and now she was standing in my living room, acting like she had authority over me in my own home. Her assistant awkwardly shuffled behind her, clutching a clipboard, clearly uncomfortable, but too afraid to challenge her boss. I could feel my anger boiling, but I also knew I had to stay calm. "You have no right to be here," I said firmly. "Leave now before I call the police." Karen didn't budge. Instead, she glanced around my living room, scanning for things to criticize. "Your blinds are not uniform with community standards. And this paint color, did you get that approved? Because I don't see it in the records." Her tone was smug, her body language entitled, as if she genuinely believed she had every right to invade my personal space. It was like she had blurred the line between HOA rules and actual ownership, convincing herself she controlled not just the neighborhood, but my home as well. Finally, I stepped forward and pointed to the door. "Out! Now!" My voice was louder this time, sharper. Her assistant tugged on her arm, whispering that maybe they should go. Reluctantly, Karen turned, but not before glaring at me and muttering, "This isn't over. You can't ignore the HOA forever." The moment the door shut behind them, I locked it, double-checked every window, and sat down, heart pounding. That wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. That was trespassing. She had crossed every boundary, both legal and personal. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. If Karen could walk into my home without fear,
What would stop her from doing it again or worse?
Confrontation scene. The trespassing incident was the last straw. Up until that point, I had tried to handle things calmly, responding politely to letters, quoting the rules, even ignoring her stares. But when Karen stepped into my home uninvited, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just dealing with an annoying HOA board member anymore. I was dealing with someone who thought she owned me. The very next day, I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. I waited until I saw her on her usual inspection walk, clipboard in hand, assistant trailing behind. With my phone recording in my pocket, just in case, I walked straight up to her. "Karen," I said firmly, "we need to talk, right now." She raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated that I dared to challenge her in public. "If this is about your so-called grievances, you'll need to file them properly with the HOA," she replied in her usual condescending tone. "No," I shot back. "This is about you trespassing in my home. You had no right to walk in without permission. That's against the law." Her face tightened. For a moment, I saw a flicker of discomfort, but she quickly covered it with arrogance. "I'm on the HOA board. I was conducting an inspection. It's my responsibility to ensure compliance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. An inspection inside my house? Do you even hear yourself? You're not law enforcement, you're not the city inspector, and you sure as hell don't have the right to enter my home. What you did was trespassing, and I have every right to press charges. Her assistant shifted nervously, clearly wishing she could vanish. "Karen, maybe we should," she began, but Karen cut her off with a sharp glare. "You think you can intimidate me with threats?" she sneered. "You don't understand how this neighborhood works. If you don't follow the rules, we'll make sure you regret it." That was the moment I lost all patience. "No, Karen, the one who's going to regret this is you. I'm done playing nice. I've reported the fire as arson, and I've already informed the police about your little visit to my home. Keep pushing, and I'll see you in court." For the first time, I saw her mask crack. Her arrogance faltered, and she looked genuinely rattled. She muttered something under her breath, turned on her heel, and stormed off, dragging her assistant along. As I stood there watching her retreat, I felt a mix of relief and determination. Relief, because I had finally stood up to her face to face. Determination, because I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't just back down. They escalate. But at least now, she knew I wasn't afraid of her anymore. This was no longer a one-sided battle. It was war, and I was ready to fight back. Calling authorities, legal action. After the confrontation, I knew one thing for sure. This situation had gone far beyond neighborhood disputes. My RV was gone, my privacy had been invaded, and my safety was at risk. Ignoring Karen wasn't an option anymore. It was time to bring in the authorities. The first step was reporting the trespassing. I went straight to the police station, filed a formal complaint, and provided every detail I could remember. The officer listened carefully, and when I explained that Karen had walked into my home without permission, his expression changed. "That's trespassing," he said plainly. "If you have evidence or witnesses, we can move forward." Luckily, I had my phone recording from the confrontation and security footage showing Karen entering my front door with her assistant. That was enough to get the report on file. Next came the arson investigation. The fire marshal's preliminary report already suggested foul play, but I pushed for updates. I handed over the grainy footage of the figure passing by the RV that night and statements from neighbors who had seen Karen lurking around. While it wasn't a smoking gun, it built a strong case of suspicion. At the same time, I contacted a lawyer. He specialized in HOA disputes, and after hearing my story, he didn't even try to hide his disbelief. "I've dealt with difficult boards before, but what you're describing is extreme. We'll file for harassment, trespassing, and damages for the RV. His confidence gave me hope. Filing the paperwork was empowering. For months, I had been reacting to Karen's aggression, always on the defensive. Now, the tables were turning. She wasn't just a neighbor making life miserable. She was a defendant in a legal battle. The HOA board was forced to get involved as well. Once the police report was filed, they could no longer ignore Karen's behavior. At a special meeting, I presented everything: letters, photos, recordings, and the fire report. Other board members looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing Karen had crossed lines they couldn't defend. Karen, of course, tried to spin the story. She claimed I was exaggerating, that she had accidentally stepped inside my home, and that the RV fire was probably electrical. But the more she talked, the less credible she sounded. Her arrogance, once intimidating, now came off as desperate. By the end of it, I felt a shift. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't the one under scrutiny. Karen was. The police had my back, the lawyer was building a case, and the HOA board was finally questioning her authority. Calling the authorities wasn't just about justice, it was about reclaiming my peace of mind. Karen wanted control, but the law was on my side, and now the battle was no longer hers to dictate.
Conclusion/lesson for viewers. Looking back at everything that happened, the burned RV, the endless harassment, the trespassing, and the confrontation, it's hard to believe all of it started with something as simple as a vehicle parked in my own driveway. Which should have been a dream come true turned into a nightmare because of one person's obsession with control. But through it all, I learned some valuable lessons that every homeowner and community member should hear. The first lesson is, know your rights. HOA boards often act like they have unlimited power, but the truth is, their authority is limited. They can enforce rules, yes, but they cannot make up new ones on a whim, and they certainly don't have the right to invade your property or your home. If I hadn't read the HOA fan book and understood what it actually said, Karen's threats and letters might have convinced me I was in the wrong when I wasn't. The second lesson is, document everything. Every letter, every picture, every video, keep a record. When things escalated, that documentation was the only reason the police and HOA board took my side. Without proof, it would have been my word against hers, and bullies thrive in that kind of uncertainty. Third, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. For months, I tried to stay polite, hoping things would calm down. But people like Karen don't back off when you ignore them. They escalate. The turning point was when I confronted her directly and then involved the authorities. Once she realized I wasn't afraid, the balance of power shifted. Finally, the biggest lesson. Your home is your safe space. No HOA rule, no neighborhood complaint, and certainly no Karen has the right to take that from you. The moment someone crosses the line into your privacy and security, it stops being a neighborly dispute and becomes a legal issue. In the end, Karen's arrogance cost her more than she ever imagined. With legal action underway and the HOA board forced to acknowledge her behavior, her grip on the neighborhood began to crumble. For me, while I lost my RV, I gained something more important: peace of mind and the confidence to defend myself. So to everyone watching, if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember, you don't have to tolerate intimidation. Stand firm, know your rights, and don't hesitate to involve the law when necessary. Your property, your privacy, and your peace are worth protecting. Because in the end, the lesson is simple. Bullies only have as much power as you allow them to. And the moment you stop letting fear control you, they lose.